No one else would touch the Duke's hand, and on her third morning at Renmore Hall, Lynette Carey walked past the housekeeper, past the valet wringing his own fingers in the corridor, past the closed door with its low, warning voice behind it, and simply went in. She did not know yet what that hand would cost her, or what it would give back. She only knew that someone had to change the linen before it mortified further, and that everyone else in the house had already decided that someone would not be them. The chamber was dim, the curtains drawn against a morning that had no business being so bright, and the Duke of Renmore sat in the one chair, angled away from the door, his ruined hand cradled against his chest the way a man holds a wound he has stopped expecting anyone to look at. "Get out," he said. He did not raise his voice. He had never needed to. Lynette set down the basin, the shears, the clean linen, and crossed the room anyway. "It's only a hand, Your Grace," she said. "I've dressed worse." She took it before he could stop her, and for a moment neither of them moved, because no one had taken that hand willingly in 5 years, and he had forgotten, a little, what it felt like not to be flinched from. The fingers were drawn into a claw the fire had shaped and left, the skin at the palm shining and hard as horn. The smallest finger gone at the second joint. She turned it gently to the light the way her father had taught her to turn any wound, without apology and without haste, and began to unwind the old dressing. "You were told to leave it," he said. "I was told a great many things this week," she said, "and most of them were wrong." He studied her then, properly, for the first time, a plain woman, not young in the way the word was usually meant, competent hands, a steadiness in the shoulders that no lady's maid in that house had managed since the fire. "You're new," he said. 3 days, she agreed, and drew the linen away, and did not change her face at what it uncovered, which was, she would learn later, the thing that undid him first, though neither of them called it that yet. Below, in the servants' hall, Mrs. Agatha Pell was already telling anyone who would listen that the new girl had marched in where 2 housemaids and a physician's boy had lost their nerve, and that either she would be dismissed by dinner or she would still be there at Michaelmas, and there was no third way about it. "Michaelmas," said the second housemaid, "is when Mr. Vane brings the trustee." "Michaelmas," said Mrs. Pell, "is when they decide whether His Grace is fit to keep his own house, and don't you say it's so loud the walls learn it too." Upstairs, Lynette worked in silence for a while, and the silence was not uncomfortable, which surprised her more than the hand had. "You'll want salve under this, not spirit," she said at last. "The last dressing was too tight at the wrist. It's why the swelling hasn't gone." "You've done this before," he said. "My father was a surgeon with the regiments," she said. "I did this before I did anything else." He watched her hands, not her face, which she understood. Faces asked questions, and hands only answered them. "Everyone else in this house is afraid of it," he said, and it was not quite a question. "Everyone else in this house has the luxury of being afraid of it," she said. "I don't." It was the truest thing she had said to him yet, though she did not explain the rest, that a woman with no dowry and a dead father's debts did not get to choose which hands she touched, only how well she touched them, and he did not ask. Though something in his stillness said he had heard the door of it and filed the shape of it away. When she had finished, the dressing sat clean and correctly loose, and he flexed the ruined fingers an inch, no more, and looked at them as though they belonged to someone he had once known. "You'll do this again tomorrow," he said. It was not quite gratitude. It was closer to a verdict. "I expect I will," she said, and gathered the basin, and did not curtsy on her way out, which the valet in the corridor would later swear was the moment he knew the house had changed, though he could not have said into what. That evening Mrs. Pell found her in the still-room, scrubbing the basin with sand, and stood in the doorway a while before she spoke. You know what day is coming, she said. My Kelmis, Lynette said. I've heard the word enough times today to plant it. Mr. Vane will bring the trustee and the family solicitor, and they will look at his grace, and they will decide whether he keeps the running of his own estate or whether it passes to a guardian in all but name until he is judged fit, Mrs. Pell said. And Mr. Vane has been very patient explaining to anyone who will sit still for it why he does not expect his grace to pass that judgment. Why would a man not want his own cousin fit to keep his house? Lynette asked, and Mrs. Pell only looked at her, the particular look of a woman who has decided a question is not yet safe to answer honestly. Weigh it twice before you ask it again, she said. That's a fine rule for medicine, Lynette said. It's a finer one for this house, said Mrs. Pell, and left her to the basin and the coming dark, and the days, though neither of them said so aloud, had already begun counting themselves down toward the one that mattered. He sent for her again the next morning, which surprised the valet more than the day before had. This time, there was no basin waiting. There was only the Duke, standing at the window with the ruined hand ungloved for once, and a ledger open on the desk that he was not looking at. I did not ask you here to dress anything, he said. I gathered that, Lynette said, since there's nothing to dress that wasn't dressed yesterday. I asked you here to tell you the terms, he said, turning. You will attend the hand, because you are, apparently, the only creature in this house willing to. You will not speak of it below stairs, you will not pity me, and you will not tell me it looks better than it does. Because I have had 5 years of people doing both, and I find I would rather be told the truth by a stranger than a comfort by a friend. Those are easy terms, Lynette said. I've never had much practice at pity. It takes more patience than I've got. Something moved at the corner of his mouth that was not quite a smile, and was gone before it could be named one. Where did a surgeon's daughter learn to bargain like a solicitor? He asked. The same place she learned to set a bone, she said. Watching him do it, and then doing it myself when he wasn't there to. He is dead, then. It was not a question dressed as kindness. It was a fact stated plainly, which she preferred. 8 years, she said, a wound in Spain that healed wrong and killed him slow instead of quick. He left me his instruments and his debts in roughly equal weight, and I have been paying off the second with the first ever since. That is not a fortune most houses would hire for, he said. Most houses didn't, she said. This one did, because your housekeeper was tired of maids who screamed. He almost laughed then. She heard the breath of it, caught and put away before it became a sound, and filed that too, without knowing yet that she would come to count such moments the way other women counted callers. Mrs. Pell found her again that afternoon, arms full of linen, and fell into step beside her down the long gallery where the family portraits hung in their gilt like a row of judges. He laughed for you, Mrs. Pell said. He did not, Lynette said. He very nearly didn't. That is more than he's very nearly done in 5 years, said Mrs. Pell, and stopped before one portrait in particular, a fair-haired young man with an easy, careless mouth, painted before some fire had had the chance to touch anything. His brother, she said. Julian, the old Marquess that was, died the same night his grace got that hand. No one's told me how, Lynette said carefully, and Mrs. Pell's face closed like a door. No one tells anyone how, she said. It's the one subject in this house with a lock on it, and I'd not go picking at that lock if I were you. Not this close to my Kelmis, not with Mr. Vane watching every door in the place like it owes him rent. Why would a room full of ash still need locking? Lynette asked, and Mrs. Pell only shook her head, the way a woman shakes her head at a question she has asked herself too many nights to answer twice for a stranger. Because the truth in it isn't ash, she said. It's only banked. and banked fires catch again quicker than new ones, if you're fool enough to breathe on them. They walked on in silence after that, but Lynette found she could not stop turning the sentence over, the way she turned a wound before she judged how deep it ran, and somewhere behind her, in a gilt frame, a dead man went on smiling his careless smile at a hall that had not forgiven him for it. Mr. Osric Vane arrived on a Tuesday, and the whole house seemed to draw its shoulders in around him, the way a room draws in around a draught it cannot place the source of. He was beautiful in the particular immaculate way of a man who has never once been caught out of composure, fair, unhurried, soft-spoken, with a smile that arrived before his sentences did, and stayed a beat too long after them. He found Lynette in the corridor outside the west chamber, and stopped as though the meeting delighted him. "You must be the new girl who isn't afraid of my cousin's hand," he said. "Word travels fast in this house," Lynette said. "Word is the only thing that does," he said, and smiled again. "I think it's a fine thing, what you're doing. Truly, he has needed someone unafraid of him for a long while, and God knows the rest of us have failed him in it." "That's kind of you to say, sir. It costs nothing to be kind," he said, "and it costs everything to pretend you are, so I try to make sure it's the first and never the second." He said it lightly, the way a man says a thing he has said many times before and found always lands well. And Lynette smiled back and thought, without quite knowing why, of a blade kept so well oiled it made no sound leaving its sheath. "You'll forgive me asking," he went on, "but a surgeon's daughter, dressing a duke's wounds, you understand how that will look, to people less generous than myself." "I understand it will look like what it is," Lynette said. "A dressing changed by someone who knows how. Of course, he said, spreading his ruined hand free palms in a gesture of surrender that surrendered nothing at all. "I only mean to warn you kindly. My Kelmus brings a great many eyes into this house, and eyes are rarely as generous as I am." He bowed, the smallest fraction, and went on down the corridor, and it was only after he had turned the corner that Lynette realized her own hands had gone still at her sides, the way they went still over a wound that was worse than it first appeared. That evening she carried the Duke's nightly dose up herself, since the footman was laid up with a chill, and found herself studying the little brown bottle the way her father had taught her to study any physic before she trusted it near a patient, turning it to the lamp, reading the apothecary's seal pressed into the wax. The wax was the wrong red. She had seen the bottle twice before, and both times the seal beneath the cork had been the deep oxblood of Fenn's shop in the village. This one ran nearer to scarlet, brighter, newer, as though pressed by a different hand or a different batch of wax entirely. It was a small thing. She told herself it was a small thing 3 separate times on the stairs, which was, she would later understand, the exact number of times a thing stops being small and starts being a fact you are choosing not to look at. She said nothing of it that night. She only measured the dose herself before she gave it, out of a habit so old it barely felt like caution, and set the level in her mind the way her father had taught her to set every level, against the day she might need to remember it. Below stairs, the household had begun to arrange itself into camps the way households do before a hearing, half of them murmuring that Mr. Vane only wanted what was best for a cousin too broken to manage his own affairs, the other half murmuring nothing at all, which Lynette was coming to understand was its own kind of answer in that house. "He's not wrong that eyes are coming," Mrs. Pell said, when Lynette found her folding linens near the fire that night. "The solicitor, Mr. Penrose, is an honest man, they say, but honest men can only judge what's put in front of them, and Mr. Vane has had 5 years to decide what that is." "And His Grace can't simply tell Mr. Penrose the truth of himself?" Lynette asked. "His Grace," said Mrs. Pell, choosing her words the way a woman chooses stepping stones across a flooded yard, "has not been entirely himself in the evenings, of late. foggy, forgetful of things he oughtn't forget. It started sometime after Mr. Vane took over the ordering of his physic, and I'll say no more than that because I've said more than I meant to already, and walls in this house have Mr. Vane's ears sewn into them. She did not need to say more. Lynette had already begun, without quite deciding to, keeping a private accounting of her own, the color of a seal, the fog that settled over a clever man's eyes some evenings and lifted by noon, the soft voice in the corridor that cost nothing to be kind and everything to pretend it, and somewhere in the keeping of it, the true shape of the coming hearing had begun to show itself to her. The way a wound shows its true depth only once you have stopped being afraid to look all the way in. It was in the still room, 3 weeks on, that the distance between them first closed to something neither of them had a polite name for. She was cataloging dried herbs against her father's old dosing tables, a habit that had followed her from his surgery into every kitchen and still room she had ever worked in, when the Duke appeared in the doorway with the particular hesitation of a man unused to entering rooms he has not been announced into. "I was told you kept a book," he said. "My father's," she said, not looking up. "Weigh it twice, spend it once," that was his rule for every dose he mixed, and I've kept the habit because it's never once failed me. A frugal philosophy for a man who gave physic away for nothing half the time, he said, and she looked up then, surprised he had guessed it. "How did you know that?" "Because you speak of him," he said, "the way a man speaks of someone he is still trying to live up to, not someone he is trying to forgive." It was, she thought, a startlingly precise thing for him to have noticed, and she said so. "I notice things," he said. "It is nearly all I have left to do with an evening." He came further into the room, uninvited, and picked up a bundle of dried lavender, turning it in the fingers of his good hand with an unexpected gentleness. "My mother kept a still room," he said. "Before the fire took the east wing and half her garden with it, I used to sit under the table while she worked and pretend I understood the Latin on her jars." "Did you?" "Not a word of it," he said. But I liked the sound of her saying it. It seemed a very safe kind of magic, the kind that only ever cured things. He set the lavender down, carefully, the way a man sets down something he is not ready to stop holding. "There is a thing I have not told you," he said, and the room went very still, the way a room goes still around a confession before it arrives. "About the fire." "You needn't," she said, though she wanted, badly, to hear it. "I know," he said. "But I find I would like to, someday, when it will not undo something it should not undo yet. There is a reason I have let this house believe the worst of me for 5 years, and it is not because the worst is true. It is only that the truth costs someone else more than the lie costs me, and I have not yet found a way to spend one without the other." It was the closest he had come to laying the secret before her, a promissory note handed over unsigned, and she understood, without being told, that she was meant to wait for the rest of it. "That's an expensive kind of silence to keep," she said. "The most expensive kind there is," he agreed. "I have been keeping it so long, I have nearly forgotten what it would feel like to set it down." She did not press him. Instead, she held out the bundle of dried chamomile she had been sorting, an offering in the only currency she had, for sleeping, she said. "Better than what's in your evening bottle, I'd wager, and considerably less trouble to swallow." He almost laughed, properly, this time, a short, surprised sound that seemed to startle him as much as it startled her, and Mrs. Pell, passing the door with an armful of linen, stopped dead in the corridor and did not move again until the sound had entirely finished, filing it away the same as everyone in that house had begun, without quite admitting it, to file away every small thaw in the Duke of Renmore, as though it were a thing worth keeping count of. "That is the first time I've heard that in this house in longer than I care to say," Mrs. Pell told her later in the kitchen, with the particular satisfaction of a woman watching a long wager finally start to turn her way. "Don't let it go to your head, girl, but don't let it go unnoticed either." Lynette said nothing, only smiled down at her father's book, at the neat, familiar hand that had taught her everything she knew about weighing what a body could bear, and did not yet let herself wonder what it might cost her to have become, in the space of 3 weeks, a woman a duke laughed for. The blow, when it came, arrived dressed as concern, which was, Lynette was learning, Osric Vane's favorite costume. He found her in the corridor outside the still room with 2 letters in his hand and an expression of a man forced, much against his wishes, to say something unpleasant. "I've had a rather troubling report from the village," he said. "About your father." "My father is 8 years dead, sir. I doubt he's been troubling anyone lately." "Not troubling in the way you mean," Osric said, gentle as ever, gentler than the words deserved. "It seems there is some question of debt left unsettled, an apothecary's account, unpaid at his death, and rather larger than a modest surgeon's practice ought to have run up. Some have wondered aloud whether the debt was owed for medicines given, or medicines sold on, if you take my meaning." "I take your meaning very well," Lynette said, and felt something go cold and still in her, the stillness she had learned from wounds worse than words. "And I'll tell you plainly it's a lie, or a misreading of an honest man's ledgers by someone who never met him." "I don't doubt your loyalty," Osric said, spreading his hands in that surrendering nothing gesture she had come to recognize. "But you'll understand how it looks, a girl of uncertain means, closely handling a great man's physic, with a father's name attached to debts no one can quite account for." "I have said nothing to my cousin. I came to you first, out of kindness, so that you might have the chance to explain it before anyone with less patience than myself hears the tale." "There is nothing to explain," she said, "because there is nothing in it." "Then I'm sure it will come to nothing," he said, in the voice of a man who has already decided otherwise, and bowed, and left her standing in the corridor with her hands gone very still and her mind turning, fast and cold, toward the wrong-colored wax on a bottle she had noticed and said nothing of. It was not until that evening, dressing the Duke's hand in a silence gone suddenly careful on both sides, that she understood the shape of what had happened, her own competence. The very thing that had won her his trust had been turned in Osric's soft hands into a blade pointed back at her throat. "You've heard something," Gabriel said, watching her face rather than her hands for once. "Your cousin has heard something," she said, "about my father, and thought it a kindness to warn me before he repeats it more widely." "What did he hear?" "That my father sold what he should have given, and that I might have learned the same trade from him." Gabriel's jaw set, the particular stillness of a man taking a blow without letting his face report it. "That is not kindness," he said. "No," she agreed. "It is a very well-dressed threat, and I imagine it is meant to teach me to be smaller than I have been. Will it?" he asked, and there was something almost fearful in the asking, as though the answer mattered to him more than he had meant to let it. "No," she said, and meant it, though her hands, wrapping the last of the linen, were not quite steady. "It's only a rumor. I've carried worse." He looked at her a long moment, and something in his face rearranged itself. Quietly, the way a house settles after a door is finally shut against a wind that has been troubling it for hours. "So have I," he said, "though I confess I have carried mine rather worse than you seem to be carrying yours." It was as close as either of them came, that night, to naming what was growing between them, but the words sat in the room anyway, plain as the lamp between them, and neither one moved to put it out. The offer came 3 days later, and it came, as such offers always did in that house, wrapped in velvet and delivered by the gentlest voice under the roof. Osric found her alone in the still room, closed the door behind him with the soft click of a man who has planned exactly how long this conversation will take, and set a small leather purse on the table between them as though it were nothing at all. "I want to be plain with you," he said, "because I think you're a plain sort of woman, and I respect that. There are those in this house, and beyond it, who believe a physic bottle has gone missing measure from time to time since you took the ordering of it in hand. I do not say I believe it. I say only that it is being said, and that by Michaelmas, when Mr. Penrose comes to weigh my cousin's fitness to keep his own house, such a whisper could do a great deal of harm to a great many people who have done nothing to deserve it." "Meaning me," Lynette said. "Meaning all of us," he said, gentle as milk. "Which is why I have come to offer you a kindness instead. A character written in my own hand, praising your skill and your honesty both. Enough to secure you a position in any respectable house in the county, further from scandal than this one is like to be by Michaelmas. And enough besides," he touched the purse without opening it, "to see you comfortably settled while you find your feet. All you need do is be gone by the end of the week, quietly, with no leave taking to trouble my cousin's peace. And if I stay, then I cannot promise what Mr. Penrose will be told, or by whom, or how kindly," he said, and smiled, and the smile did not reach anywhere near his eyes. "I would so much rather see you settled well than see you ruined for no reason at all." Truly, Lynette looked at the purse a long moment and thought of her father's debts, half paid, and the county's long memory for a woman dismissed under any cloud however small, and the easy, comfortable years such a purse might buy her far from a house that was, by any honest reckoning, none of her business to save. Then she thought of a hand no one else would touch, and a laugh that had startled a whole corridor into silence, and a promissory note not yet paid in full. "No," she said, "thank you, but no." Osric's composure did not crack, not quite, but something in it thinned, the way ice thins before it gives. "You understand what you're refusing." "I understand exactly what I'm refusing," she said. "A comfortable lie, dressed as a kindness, paid for out of a purse that isn't yours to spend so freely." "I'll take my chances with the truth, sir, and with Mr. Penrose's honesty, since you seem so certain of it yourself." He took up the purse, unhurried, and inclined his head, the smallest, coldest bow she had yet seen from him. "Then I am sorry for what comes next," he said, "because I did try to spare you it, and left her alone in the still room with her heart going hard and fast, and her hands, for once, entirely steady, because refusal, she was discovering, cost a great deal less to the nerves than temptation did. That night the summons came sooner than she expected. Gabriel's face, when she entered, was a door shut against her, and Mrs. Pell stood in the corner with her hands twisted in her apron, and Osric stood by the window with the particular satisfaction of a man who has arrived early to watch his own weather break. "There are questions about the physic," Gabriel said, and his voice was careful in a way it had not been careful with her before, careful the way a man is careful with something he has been told might cut him. "About the ordering of it, about your father's debts." "Ask me then," Lynette said. "Ask me plainly, and I will answer you plainly, the way I have answered everything since I came into this house. I am asking," he said, and would not quite meet her eyes, and she understood, with a coldness that had nothing to do with the season, that the fog Mrs. Pell had spoken of was in the room with them even now, thickening his good sense the way it thickened every evening, and that the man refusing to look at her was not entirely the man who had laughed in the still room 3 weeks before. She was given a week to prove nothing and was dismissed from the sick room before the week was out, which she understood, coldly, was precisely the length of time Osric required, and no more. The footman who had once been laid up with a chill now carried the Duke's evening dose, and the door to the west chamber was closed to her, and the house that had watched her march boldly through it 3 weeks before now watched her walk its corridors with the particular carefulness of a woman waiting to hear whether she is to be dismissed outright or merely starved of purpose until she leaves of her own accord. She spent the idle hours the only way she knew how to spend fear, by working. She went back to her father's book night after night and set beside it every fact she had gathered since the wrong-colored wax first caught the lamplight, the fog that thickened some evenings and cleared by noon, the new apothecary's boy who had begun making the deliveries in place of old Fen himself, the particular, patient gentleness with which Osric Vane always struck. She had nearly convinced herself she had built a case out of nothing but her own wounded pride when Wren found her in the garden at dusk. The child was Julian's daughter, 8 years old and mostly silent since the fire that had taken her father and her uncle's hand both, though she had taken, in the past weeks, to trailing Linnet the way a shy animal trails the one person in a house who has never once flinched from anything. "There's a place in the old nursery," Wren said, without preamble, the way children announce the things that matter most. "Behind the hearthstone. Papa used to hide things there for me to find, like a game. I went back after, I don't know why, I wanted something of his." She held out a small tarnished locket on a broken chain, half melted at one edge where the fire had reached it, and stopped just short of finishing its work. The clasp fused shut with age and heat both. "There's paper inside," Wren said. "I can hear it when I shake it. I couldn't open it. I didn't want to break it trying." Linnet took it with the same steadiness she had once taken a ruined hand, and felt, beneath her fingers, the small hard fold of something that had survived a fire meant to take it. "Does anyone else know you found this?" "No," Wren said. "Uncle Osric doesn't like it when I go to the nursery. He says it isn't good for me to remember." "I expect that's the first honest thing he's ever said to you," Linnet murmured, though not for the reason he thinks. She sat with the child a moment longer, turning the locket in the last of the light, and thought of a promissory note laid unsigned across a still-room table 3 weeks before. A truth that cost someone else more than the lie cost him. "Your Uncle Gabriel loved your father very much," she said carefully. "Whatever anyone has told you, whatever this house has whispered, I do not believe for one moment that he let him die for want of trying. I think there is a very great deal this house has gotten wrong, and I think that locket might be the first thing in 5 years brave enough to say so." Wren looked at her with a child's plain, unflinching trust, the same trust she had learned, apparently, from watching a stranger take her uncle's ruined hand without flinching first. "Will you find out what it says?" she asked. "I will," Linnet said, "though it may cost me the last good name I have left in this house to do it." That night, by a single candle, working the locket's fused clasp with the smallest of her father's old instruments, Patience learned over years of coaxing splinters and shrapnel from flesh that did not want to give them up. She felt it finally give, and drew out a single half-burned sheet, brittle at its blackened edge, and unfolded it with hands gone suddenly and entirely still, and read, in a hand she did not know but would come to know well before the week was out, the first lines of a dead man's unfinished letter to his brother. She did not sleep that night. She sat instead with the letter and her father's dosing book both open before her. one truth illuminating the other, the way a second lamp thrown into a dark room shows corners the first lamp alone had left in shadow, and by the time the sky grayed toward morning she understood, entirely, what question she would need someone to answer aloud, before witnesses, in the light, before Michaelmas came and took the truth down into the ground with it for good. She went to Mrs. Pell first, because a plan built alone in an unfriendly house is a plan built on sand, and Mrs. Pell, to her lasting credit, did not ask a single unnecessary question before she said yes. Old Fenn's boy still delivers to the kitchens Tuesdays, the housekeeper said. Young Tobias Nash, frightened of his own shadow, that one, and frightened worse of Mr. Vane, which tells you a good deal about which of the two is more dangerous to cross. Lynette found Tobias behind the kitchen garden wall on the Tuesday, a thin, anxious boy of perhaps 16, who went the color of old linen the moment she raised the subject of the bottle's seal. "I don't know anything," he said, too quickly, the words of a boy who has rehearsed them and knows it. "And the dose inside it?" "I only deliver what old Fenn mixes," Tobias said, and then, because fear makes honest men clumsy, added, "It's not what Fenn mixes anymore, not since Mr. Vane started sending his own paper up with the order. Fenn grumbles about it something fierce, says it's not his recipe at all, but he fills it because Mr. Vane pays double and says a word to the magistrate could see Fenn's license pulled for a man in his condition, needing stronger physic than a village shop's ever kept before. Would Fenn say so, before a solicitor, if he were asked plainly and kindly and not made to fear for his license in the asking? Tobias looked at her with the particular desperation of a boy who has been carrying a stone in his pocket for months, and has just been offered, for the first time, a place to set it down. He might, he said, if someone stood between him and Mr. Vane while he said it. "Then I will stand there," Lynette said. "And so I think will Mr. Penrose, if the matter's put to him properly, in the light, with witnesses, rather than whispered in a corridor the way everything in this house has been whispered for 5 years." She went to Gabriel last, though it cost her the most, since the door to his chamber had not opened to her in a week, and she did not know what fog might be sitting over him when it finally did. He was thinner than he had been, the composure worn to something brittle, and he looked at her a long moment before he spoke, as though relearning a face he had been told to distrust. "They tell me you've been asking questions in the village," he said. "I have. About my physic. About your physic, and your cousin's wax, and a letter your niece found behind a hearthstone that your brother began writing the night he died, and never finished," she said, and watched every trace of fog burn off his face at once, the way morning mist burns off water when the sun finally clears the trees. "If I tell you what happened that night," he said, "I will be handing you the one thing I have spent 5 years protecting." "You'll be handing it to Wren's future instead of Osric's," Lynette said gently. "There is a difference, Your Grace, though I understand it may not feel like one yet." He closed his eyes, and when he opened them again, something in him had settled, the way a scale settles once the true weight is finally set upon it. "Then we had better be ready by Michaelmas," he said, "because I do not believe my cousin means to give either of us a day longer than that to be right." Michaelmas came in cold and bright, the kind of morning that made the whole valley look freshly scoured, and Renmore Hall's great hall, unused for any formal purpose in 5 years, was opened and swept and set with chairs before it, because Mr. Aldous Penrose, family solicitor and trustee, did not conduct his business in corners when a great house's future was at stake. He sat at the head of a long table with his clerk beside him, patient and gray and entirely unmoved by Osric Vane's easy charm, which Lynette took, from the first quarter hour, as the best possible sign. Osric spoke first, and spoke well, laying out 5 years of gentle patience, a cousin's decline into fog and forgetfulness, a household unsettled by a servant of questionable family history, meddling in physics she had no business near. "I do not say this with pleasure," he said, and his voice was, as ever, the gentlest in the room. "I say it because someone must, and because I have carried the burden of this estate quietly, out of love, for longer than anyone here troubles to notice." "Then you will not object," Gabriel said, rising, "to my cousin's account being weighed against the physic he has been ordering in my name," and set upon the table the small brown bottle, its wrong red seal catching the window light. Beside it, Lynette's father's dosing book opened to a marked page, and beside that, Tobias Nash brought forward pale and trembling, but present, which was, in that house, its own kind of courage. "Mr. Nash," Lynette said, "will you tell Mr. Penrose plainly what has been mixed into his Grace's evening physic these 6 months, and on whose written order?" The boy's voice shook at first and steadied as he went, the way a hand steadies once the first cut is made, and there is nothing left to do but finish it, and he laid out, in his own halting words, a dosage of poppy far beyond anything a burned hand's pain required, ordered weekly on paper in Osric Vane's own hand, paid for double the going rate to buy Fenn's silence about a recipe that was not his own. "That is a frightened boy's fancy," Osric said, still gentle, though something beneath the gentleness had gone very still. "One precise question, Mr. Penrose said, unmoved, and we shall know whether it is fancy or fact. Mr. Nash, did Mr. Vane ever instruct you, in his own words, what would happen to Fenn's license should either of you speak of the change in recipe to anyone in this house?" The boy looked once at Osric and once at Lynette, and something in him broke open the way a held breath finally breaks. "He said Fenn would lose his shop and his license both, sir, and that I'd lose my place besides, and that no one weighs the word of an apothecary's boy against a gentleman's, and he was right about that last part until today," he said, and the room went entirely silent, the particular silence of a crowd realizing, all at once, which way its sympathies must now bend. Gabriel did not raise his voice even then. He only produced, last, the half-burned letter drawn from a dead man's locket, and read it aloud himself, in a voice that did not once break, though it cost him visibly to keep it from doing so. His brother Julian's own unfinished hand, confessing a night of drink and carelessness with a nursery lamp, thanking in advance. In case anything should come of his own foolishness, the brother he trusted to carry whatever blame the fire left behind, rather than let his daughter grow up thinking her father a monster, instead of merely a man who had once been careless in a way that killed him. "I did not set that fire," Gabriel said into the silence that followed. "I went into it, and I pulled my niece from a nursery already burning, and I could not reach my brother in time to save him too, and when this house began to whisper that I had let him die for cowardice, I let them. Because the alternative was Wren growing up knowing her father's last night alive was also his most careless one. That is the truth my cousin has spent 5 years profiting from my silence to bury deeper, because a duke too broken and too doubted to manage his own affairs is a duke whose cousin need only wait, patiently, gently, for the trusteeship to fall into his hands instead." Osric's composure did not shatter all at once. It went the way ice goes on a slow river, a long crack spreading outward from one small, decisive blow, until at last he sat down, unbidden, in the chair behind him, and put one immaculate hand briefly over his eyes, and when he spoke again, the gentleness in his voice had become something closer to grief. "I was the second son," he said, "to no one and everyone, of a house that never once needed a second son for anything, and I watched Julian have all of it, careless and unearned. And then I watched Gabriel inherit even the ruin of it, and I told myself, for 5 years, that I was only taking what carelessness had already forfeited twice. Mr. Penrose let the silence sit a moment, the proper weight of it, before he spoke, brisk and final. The trusteeship remains with the Duke of Renmore, whose fitness I have never in this hearing seen better demonstrated than in the last quarter hour, he said. As to Mr. Vane, the law would see him tried for what has been done here, and I do not think any soul in this room would call that unjust. But I am told this family has had enough of public ruin to last a generation, and I will not manufacture more of it for the county's entertainment. Gabriel rose then and looked a long moment at the cousin he had grown up beside, and when he spoke his voice held no triumph at all, only the tired mercy of a man who has decided cruelty, however earned, is not a debt he wishes to collect. You'll have an allowance, he said, enough to live quietly, somewhere far enough from Renmore that Wren need never see your face again, unless she chooses it herself one day, grown. You'll sign whatever paper Mr. Penrose puts before you resigning every claim on this house. And you will go before nightfall, Osric, not because the law demands it, but because I find I would still rather show you more mercy than you showed me. And I do not entirely understand why, except that I am tired, finally, of this family being made smaller by its own grief. Osric looked at him a long moment, and something passed over his immaculate face that was, for the first time in 5 years, entirely unrehearsed. That is more than I would have given you, he said quietly. I know, Gabriel said, which is rather the point, and it was mercy delivered without a single raised voice in the room, the way the gravest things in that house had always been delivered. And by the time the great hall emptied into the cold, bright afternoon, the story the county would carry home was not the one Osric Vane had spent 5 years writing. It was 3 days later, in the garden where a certain wren had taken to singing each evening in the old hawthorn by the nursery wall, that Gabriel found her among the last of the season's lavender, and stood a moment simply watching her hands work before he spoke. I have been trying to decide, he said, how a man says thank you for a truth he did not think he wanted until it was given to him. You could simply say it, Lynette said. I have never been simple about anything in my life, he said, though I find, since my Kelmus, that I would very much like to start. He held out his ruined hand, palm up, an offering rather than a request, and she took it the way she had taken it that very first morning, without flinching, without ceremony, only steady. It's only a hand, she said softly. I've dressed worse. So you've told me, he said, though I begin to think you took it for reasons that have very little to do with dressing it at all. Perhaps 1 or 2, she allowed. Then let me be plain, since plainness seems to be the only currency you've ever accepted from me, he said, and something in his voice had gone unguarded in a way she had not yet heard from him. There is no fitness hearing left to win, no rumor left to outrun, no debt of gratitude I am asking you to settle. Whatever you decide now, you decide with nothing at stake but your own wish, and I find I would rather have your answer weighed on those terms alone, or not have it at all. Marry me because you wish it, Lynette. It's the only coin I'll take. Somewhere in the hawthorn, the wren sang on, unbothered, the way birds are always unbothered by the weight of what humans decide beneath them, and Lynette found that her hands, for once in a very long and careful life, were not thinking about wounds or weights or debts at all. Then I wish it, she said, plainly, and for no better reason than that I have never once, since that first morning, wanted to let go of that hand, and he laughed then, properly, fully, the sound Mrs. Pell had once stopped dead in a corridor to hear, and this time there was no one left in the house who needed to be startled by it, because everyone in it had long since learned to expect it. The wedding, when it came, was small and quiet against the county's appetite for spectacle. A handful of witnesses in the chapel at Renmore, Mrs. Pell weeping openly and without apology through the whole of it, Wren solemnly bearing a locket newly mended on a new chain. Tobias Nash given, at Gabriel's insistence, an apprenticeship with a fair apothecary 2 villages off, where no one would ever again ask him to choose between his conscience and his license. Old Fenn kept his shop and his license both, and told the story for years after, of the night a boy's honest fear had undone a gentleman's 5 years of quiet theft. The cold, polished young woman Osric had once steered gently toward Gabriel's notice, Miss Cordelia Ashworth, who had learned the truth of his scheming only at the hearing and recanted every kind word she had ever spoken for him. Married, within 2 years, a plain, decent baronet who valued her considerably more than Osric ever had, and sent Linnet, each Michaelmas after, a short and genuinely warm letter. Osric Vane lived out his allowance in a distant county and wrote twice a year careful letters to Wren that grew, over the seasons, less immaculate and more honest, until the day she chose, grown, to answer one. Almost a year to the day after that first morning, Linnet Carey, now Duchess of Renmore, walked again down the corridor outside the West Chamber, where no household stood frozen with fear outside any door, where the curtains were thrown back on a bright ordinary morning, and found her husband at the window with his ruined hand ungloved and resting easily on the sill. Wren curled into the window seat beside him with a book, the wren in the hawthorn outside singing its ordinary evening song a full hour early, as though it too had lost track of what season it ought to be minding. He looked up and held out the hand before she had even crossed the threshold, the way a man holds out a thing he has finally stopped being afraid to offer. It was only a hand. She had never once let go of it. If this story warmed you, if you found yourself, somewhere in it, rooting for the plain girl who simply refused to flinch, then come sit a while longer by this fire before you go. There's a chair kept for you here, a kettle always near the boil, and I'd love nothing more than to hear, in the comments, which moment stayed with you longest, the first time she took his hand, or the last. If you'd like more evenings like this one, consider staying on and subscribing so there's always a place kept warm for you when the next story's ready to be told. Until then, be gentle with the overlooked ones in your own house, and go on holding the hands no one else will.